Right. So today I wanted to speak about the power of friendships, and I got a few examples from the Bible that I feel like hold a lot of characteristics and really model friendship in such a beautiful way. So the first one I wanted to use is I wanted to talk about the friendship between God and Abraham, and I wanted to use Genesis 18 verses 1 to 5. As always, I'll just read it and then we are going to get into it. Genesis 18 1 to 5. Alright, so it says, "And the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them, and bowed himself to the earth, and said, O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree, while I bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh yourselves. And after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant. So they said, do as you have said." Alright. So in this short excerpt from the whole verse of Genesis 18, what really struck out to me and what really was really beautiful for me to see in terms of the relationship between God and Abraham was the amount of hospitality, the amount of care that Abraham had. The way that he was so quick to, first of all, recognize them, but also to acknowledge them, to ask them to sit down, to ask them to ask the reverence he had from God, to ask them if he could be of service to them, just bring out a little of this, a little of that. That there's so much care and acknowledgement and hospitality that I think in friendships is so important. To be able to sit with someone, and not only that, but to want to see them be happy, to want to see them be comfortable. I wrote in my notes like, there's a care that he had about him when he was when he was with God, and that is such a powerful thing. The other thing I wanted to speak about was also the fact that he was willing to inconvenience himself. He went to get the most obviously it's late in the verse, but he went to get the most the best, I think it was a sheep or something. He went to get the best sheep. He asked Sarah to make bread. He brought the water. He was willing to inconvenience himself in each of this because these were his friends. The relationship between God and Abram was so deep and was so like intimate that God wasn't just God to Abraham. There was also a sense of like, I'm here because of you. I want you to be comfortable. There's a very deep like personal tie to that I feel like is lost in the way that that is lost, and that is also important to model in our friendships as well, is the ability to hold someone to that, to be willing to inconvenience ourselves, to be willing to put in that work, to be of service. That is such a beautiful thing. And then the other thing I wanted to speak about was also the relationship between David and Jonathan. And this was found in 1 Samuel 20 verses 1 to 17. Let me get to that real quick. 1 Samuel 20. Let me just close the window first. Alright. 1 Samuel verses 1 to 17. 1 Samuel 20 verses 1 to 17. It says, Then David fled from Naioth in Ramah, and came and said before Jonathan, What have I done? What is my guilt? And what is my sin before your father, that he seeks my life? And he said to him, Far from it, you shall die. Behold, my father does nothing either great or small without disclosing it to me. And why should my father hide this from me? It is not so. But David vowed again, saying, Your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes. And he thinks, Do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death. Then Jonathan said to David, Whatever you say, I will do to you. David said to Jonathan, Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit at the table with the king. But let me go, that I may hide myself in the field till the third day at evening. If your father misses me at all, then say, David earnestly asked to leave of me to run to Bethlehem his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the clan. If he says, Good, it is well with your servant. But if he is angry, then no harm is determined for him by him. Therefore deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a covenant with God, with the Lord with you. But if there is guilt in me, kill me yourself, for why should you bring me to your father? And Jonathan said, Far be it from you. If I knew that it was determined by my father that harm should come to you, would I not tell you? Then David said to Jonathan, Who will tell me if your father answers you roughly? And Jonathan said to David, Come, let us go out into the field. So they both went out into the field. And Jonathan said to David, The Lord, the God of Israel, be witness. When I have sounded out my father about this time tomorrow, or the third day, behold, if he is well disposed towards David, shall I not then send and disclose it to you? But should it please my father to do you harm, the Lord do so to Jonathan, and more also, if I do not disclose it to you and send you away, that you may go in safety. May the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. If I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, that I may not die, and do not cut me off from your steadfast love from my house forever. When the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth. And Jonathan made a covenant to the house of David, saying, May the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies. And Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. So, in these verses, one of the things that I wanted to point out about the power of friendship was the reassurance. In each of the verses, in the way that this part is like even written, everywhere where David was weak, everywhere where David felt like something was wrong, Jonathan reassured him. If you look at verse 1, go to the next verse, it's David saying, Man, I feel like I'm going to be killed. And then you have Jonathan reassuring him. In the next verse, but this is going to happen, what if this happens? And Jonathan reassures him. That's literally how this whole, from verse 1 to 17, that's how it's all structured. It is David being weak, it's him feeling intensely like there's something wrong that's going to happen, and Jonathan Jonathan reassuring him. And I think that friendships are built on that. They are built on that because that reassurance confirms the commitment by both parties to this relationship. There's a certain sense, as human beings, we need that reassurance. We need to feel like we're both committed to something, even as friends, even as something as simple as you caring or sending a text or anything like that. Those things build a lot of commitment. They reassure you in your mind, whether you verbally ask for it or not. They reassure you that we are both committed to this relationship, and that is such a powerful thing that is seen in this story. And I did say another thing was like how Jonathan took David's feelings seriously, even though David had very real fears. Jonathan took each of them seriously. He didn't he didn't dismiss them. He took them seriously, and he took them seriously enough to reassure him, to make a covenant with God with him. He went to literally the highest points just to reassure David. And as a friend, that says a lot, because he didn't need to. This is Jonathan, the son of the king. But for him to be able to lower himself to in this friendship, to serve David in that way, to make that covenant, it says a lot about the friendship and how they both viewed it. And another thing I really appreciated as well was the fact that even that at the end it speaks about how Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. And I think that love, the way that they were so freely in love with each other, the way they were so freely intertwined. Though I think it's in the Psalms or somewhere where it's like, or I don't know where it was, but it's like David loved, the love that they shared was more than the love of a woman. That was how deep it was, how deeply intimate it was. And I think that the friendship between David and Jonathan, I think, speaks to a lot of friendships where sometimes it will feel like that love goes deeper than any romantic relationship can have. And these are the foundations of it. These moments, these experiences where it's like David is in such deep turmoil, and Jonathan is reassuring him. There's something very powerful of that we can learn and that we can also model in our own friendships as well. And then the next one that I wanted to speak about as well is Jesus at the Garden of Gethsemane, and that is found in Matthew 26 Matthew 26 verse 36 to 46. Where is that? There we go. And so I'll just read it. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And taking with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me." And going a little further, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." And he came to the disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to them, So could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you may not enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, "My Father, if this cannot pass unless I drink it, your will be done." And again he came and found them sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. So leaving them again, he went away and prayed for the 3rd time, saying the same words again. Then he came to the disciples and said to them, "Sleep and take your rest later on. See, the hour is at hand, that the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Please, rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand." Alright, in this part of the word, I wanted to focus on, or I wanted to point out the ministry of presence. The ministry of presence among friends is extremely important. That is one of the most pivotal parts of our journeys in life. You know, the most critical moment for Jesus, I think, is at this moment in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he is at his most vulnerable, when he is at his most weak, when he is at his most when he is at his most overwhelmed by what is about to happen, by what he needs to do. This moment over here is the moment that he called upon his 3 trusted friends. And I think that as for us as well, there are moments in life when we're going to have to go through things that we can't go through them alone. We are going to need 2 or 3 trusted friends. We're always going to have a lot of friends, but we need that inner circle of 2 or 3 friends that can be with us in those critical moments. In those moments when we know when we know we are vulnerable, when we know we are not able to handle anything in this moment. And I love that Jesus didn't even move far. It says that he moved a little farther. He didn't move to the side or go to the corner. He just moved a little further, and he probably cried. He cried. I think in another gospel it says he cried tears of blood. He did all of that in their presence. He allowed himself to process the turmoil that he was experiencing, the fear, the sadness, the scope of the situation. He allowed himself to process that in the vulnerability with his with his friends. And I think that that's something we can all model, where in whatever that looks like for all of us, in those moments when we are all going to be in that time, we should also go ahead and call upon those 2 or 3 trusted friends. Not when we are strong, not when we have everything figured out, but when we are still processing. And another thing as well is, like, not even they will have the answers. Sometimes they won't have the answers. We're not calling them because they have the answers, but it's because we know that their presence means so much in this moment. And I think there's so much that we can take from that. And one of the things I did want to speak about as well is that your friends are going to fail you. You are going to fail as a friend. When you fail, not if, you have to be aware of that. You have to be aware of that, and you have to be comfortable with that failure. You're going to fail. You're not, one of the things that's really interesting is, like, 3 times, even after Jesus basically bet his soul to them, he bet his soul to, like, his inner circle, they still fell asleep. They weren't able to stay awake. In the most critical moment, his friends weren't able to be there for him as he wanted them to be. And that is such a for him, I'm sure he felt for Jesus, I'm sure he felt let down by these people who I think he considered his closest friends. And so I think for us as well, we can take also heart in the fact that, even even Jesus' friends failed him. So when we go through those moments, I'm sure because of this, we can also have grace in that as well. We can take grace from these moments. We can take grace from seeing the weaknesses of Jesus' friends as well. So when we are the friend who fails, we're also like, hey man, you have a point of reference. When your friends fail you, you have a point of reference. And I think that says so much, and it bears so much, that it models so much of how we should approach our friendships, which is that grace is so important. Grace is not only important, but it is vital. If Jesus could have used this moment to, like, cast them aside, to leave them aside, but he had grace for them and received the beautiful friendship and the relationship that was built beyond that. So yeah, man, I think that it's very important for us to recognize our humanity and our to recognize our ability to fail, and not to be afraid of it, but to see it and to have a healthy relationship with it. And then finally we have John and Jesus. This is in John 13 verse 21 to 20. John 13 verse 21 to 20. John 13. Okay, it says, after saying these things, Jesus was troubled in his spirit and testified, truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me. The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he spoke. One of his disciples, whom Jesus loved, was reclining at Jesus' side. So Simon Peter motioned to him to ask Jesus whom he was speaking. So that disciple, leaning back against Jesus, said to him, Lord, who is it? Jesus answered, it is he to whom I will give this morsel of bread when I have dipped it. So when he had dipped the morsel, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Then after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him. Jesus said to him, what you are going to do, do quickly. Now no one at the table knew why he had said this to him. Some thought that because Judas had the money back, Jesus was telling him, buy what we need for the feast, or that he should give something to the poor. So after receiving the morsel of bread, he immediately went out, and it was night. And in my notes, I titled this, The Protection of Intimacy with God and the Dangers of Distance from God. And I wanted to pick on a very beautiful and a particular scene that is in this time where it says, in verse 23, where it says, one of his disciples, whom Jesus loved, was reclining at the table at Jesus' side. At Jesus' side. I think it's a KJV, but the KJV uses bosom. I love that. That's one of my favorite words. But it says that John, who was writing, was like leaning on Jesus' bosom, which is like his chest. And I think that is such a beautiful image of friendship. It's such a beautiful image of friendship. It's such a beautiful image of surrender. And as friends, you are going to have to surrender to one another. You are going to have to lean. What is leaning? It says verse 25. So that disciple, leaning back against Jesus, said to him, Lord, who is it? He was leaning back to him. There was, there's a certain level of comfort that you need to have to lean on a person like that. And I think that for John to be able to lean on Jesus like that, to not be afraid to show that intimacy with other people around, that is so powerful. That is like, I can't even wrap my mind around it. But it just because when you think about it, like these are two grown men, and you see a grown man leaning on Jesus like that, that's such a powerful picture. And it reminds me of that picture, and it reminds me of the verse where it says the kingdom of God belongs to the one like these, and is referring to children. And that is literally what we're seeing here. The way that John is leaning into Jesus' bosom. There's nothing more that he desires apart from that closeness, and he's willing to lean, to let go of any other thing but just to surrender everything and to lean into him. And I said as well, the way that he leaned was not just in a physical way, but it was emotional. It was a relational depth that his leaning symbolized. That there was a part of their relationship, that when Jesus said the disciple whom Jesus loved, that love was formed out of a deepness. There was a depth that John and Jesus had gone through that was deeper than anything else. And I think these moments when you see this man lean into Jesus, you see that this is the product of so much love and comfortability and surrender of everything, of all his weaknesses, of all his strengths, of himself. And he's leaning into himself as a child, like a child. It's very childlike in a way. And I think as friends, we need to also lean into that as well, where with each other there should be that moment of where boundaries are just shared, where we can lean into each other without feeling like this or that. We are leaning into each other. And I think that is so powerful. That is such a powerful thing, because, and I'll say this here, is that in as much as John was leaning on Jesus, Jesus was strong for him. Jesus created that space for him. He created that space to receive John. He didn't push him away. He created that space to receive him and to comfort him and to keep them and to allow him to lean on his bosom. And I think as friends as well, we can create those spaces of comfort. We can create those spaces emotionally, relationally, physically. We can create those moments where our friends feel that love, and that space of care that we can fully surrender into them. And I appreciate the Bible for putting this, because that is such a powerful thing to see. And then on the final part, I wanted to juxtapose, John and Jesus relationship with Judas and Jesus, where he says that in the book it says, Jesus is basically revealing that that Judas is going to betray him, right? And what I wanted to say here was that the way that these two men speak to each other, there's a distance. If you see when Jesus is like, whatever you want to do, what does it say exactly? It says, what does it say that? It says, what you are going to do quickly. There is a distance in that. And in other parts of the word, we also see how Judas was stealing from the money basket. This is from like cultural context. I don't know if it's biblical, but there was a discussion where Judas was kind of underwhelmed by Jesus' message, where he thought that Jesus would come and to be this very rah leader that was going to destroy Rome, and to have someone who was very soft and that was very like, his power was in his weakness, his power was in his service. Those ideological differences between Judas and John and Jesus was something that was never brought up, or it was never communicated, and that led to a distance. And we see this distance culminate between Judas and John, where he leaves. In Jesus' moment, as he's preparing, he leaves the Passover. That is like, imagine your friend leaving you at such a critical moment, like maybe at a wedding or like a party or something, like he leaves, and it says a lot how, if you look at how John, nothing could separate that intimacy between him and Jesus. On the contrary, Judas allowed everything to create that distance between him and God. He allowed everything to push him away. Every doubt, every mistake, everything was used as a kind of like this, as a wall. Like everything was just moving. And now at the end of it, he ended up committing like one of the worst crimes. Like, you put a man who was fully innocent to death, basically. And so, as friends, I think one thing I did want to speak about is how we can learn a lot from Judas and Jesus, where if we allow barriers, if we allow our communication to not allow communication to create space for conflict, that is going to push us apart. If every small thing is going to lead us further and further away, if we're not able to communicate on the small things, if we're not able to understand that we are all different, there's so much that we are going to struggle with, And I think that we can learn from this in terms of just finding different ways to pursue intimacy. To pursue intimacy when we understand each other, when we understand our friends. To pursue intimacy when we make mistakes. To pursue intimacy and even in times when we are struggling with each other, there's still space. We have to maintain that space of intimacy. And I think that is so important. It's so important that we cultivate those spaces as friends, and to cultivate that space for that friendship, in spite of any barriers that we may face. Yeah, so I did want to just speak about that, and yeah, I hope that this has helped us to gain just a model of friendship, and to see the friendships across the Bible. And I think, yeah, let us take that into our own friendships, and see how that will continue to just cultivate us to be better friends, to be more intimate friends, to be more loving friends, to be more friends who are willing to be of service to each other, man. There's so much that we can get from that. And yeah, man, thank you so much for watching. Thank you very much. I appreciate each and every one of you. Yeah, I'll see you guys somewhere, somehow on one of these channels. Most probably I'll see you guys next week here, next week Thursday, on right here on the path.